It's safe to say most people have heard of Baldur's Gate 3 by now. It became enough of a phenomenon through marketing, word of mouth, and popular critical reception for countless players entirely unaccustomed to D&D, and even popular media like South Park, to take notice of. And most recently, it just swept the Game Awards. It's an extremely popular game that seems to have propelled CRPGs into the mainstream in a way they haven't enjoyed for some time, if ever. But I'd also guess that conversely, most people aren't terribly familiar with Baldur's Gate 3's predecessors, in particular 1998's Baldur's Gate, a game that, funny enough, found itself in a comparable position and forged its own similar benchmark for quality before the turn of the millennium. Lauded in its time as the savior of a dying genre, does this 25-year-old CRPG still hold any magic? Does its blood still run in the likes of newer RPGs and Larian's recent entry? How has the way we played changed? How has the culture around play changed? And how does that chasm of difference, strangely enough, make 1998's Baldur's Gate resistant to replacement in the shadow of another incredible new sequel? 1998's Baldur's Gate came at a tenuous period for the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop. The game's advanced second edition from 1989 was now long in the tooth, inundated with market-diluting supplementary products, and just a year earlier now the property of Wizards of the Coast, who promised a forthcoming new edition from a new generation of designers, setting the stage for a good deal of excitement and trepidation for where the game was at and what was going to come. Enter Bioware, a medical software company turned game developer under Black Isle Studios, who were given the D&D license from TSR and tasked to make a game based on the current edition. Unlike Larian Studios, Bioware didn't have a pedigree in RPGs or really games at all just yet. In fact, no one on the development team for Baldur's Gate had ever shipped a game before. Some had no software experience at all, like creative director James Olin, who got his job entirely on his familiarity with the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, and his reputation for being an incredible and much desired local dungeon master. Many of the game's original characters come directly from Olin's tabletop game.
Go for the—
Yes, especially that one. It's a peek into an entirely different mindset around game development, a scrappier era of RPGs built by genuine bona fide nerds trying to bring their pen and paper games to life in the digital realm. In that same spirit, it all starts with character creation, setting stats, selecting race and class, doing some light aesthetic customization. But it's in the nuance of how we go about it that paints an entirely different picture of play. For starters, your character's race determines which classes are available to you. Only human characters, for example, may play paladins. Dwarves can't be any kind of arcane magic-using class. And all of these classes have stat requirements that need to be met, a barrier that the game thankfully models by only generating appropriate stats after class selection, and equipment restrictions to play them. On the surface, this all probably seems arbitrary and restrictive to someone more accustomed to newer RPGs, but coupled with each of these races' inherent bonuses, it paints a pretty consistent picture of a fantasy world with firm rules and assumptions. Paladins, owing no small part to the likes of the 12 Peers of Charlemagne, the Knights of the Round Table, or Tolkien's own Aragorn, son of Arathorn, are righteous, distinctly human warriors, bound to defense of all good and just. Dwarves, similar to the dwarves of Tolkien and the Norse Eddas from which he drew inspiration, are master smiths and warriors, naturally resistant and wary of the ways of arcane magic. Wizards, owing much to the Dying Earth stories of Jack Vance and the dark sorcerers of Howard's Conan stories, are unable to wield many weapons or wear any armor. You get the picture. Gary Gygax was fond of calling it the game milieu, kind of sense of place and tone informed by the convergence of history, fiction, myth, and a rule set selectively emulating it. It's something Gary's first edition of the Advance game was extremely concerned with, establishing a kind of standard world through the rules and our collective understanding of the inspiration behind them. The Forgotten Realms, the world described by the rules of the 2nd edition, evoke a classic if predictable fantasy world inspired by the titans of fantasy fiction. Tolkien, Vance, Anderson, Howard et al. A delightfully straightforward kitchen sink setting. Valiant knights, wise Gandalfian wizards, dwarven warriors, elven rangers, brutish evil orcs, a messy pastiche of Renaissance Europe and the more savage Middle Ages. It's all here in Baldur's Gate, at times lovingly ribbed at or subverted, but many times completely at face value. It's a traditionalism and sincerity which is both refreshing and charming, a little time capsule of a bygone era of fantasy and role-playing. Getting back to the game itself though, you've made a character and picked one of the dozen or so lovingly painted, but honestly kinda goofy character portraits, and started up. In the game's opening cinematics, we see an armored knight confronted by an unmistakably evil warrior on a dark tower, replete with a looming thunderstorm.
There are others. I can show you, please.
The knight says. Our evil warrior unabated knows there are others. He will find them, and they too will meet such a fate at his hands. Now at the game's start proper,
nestled atop the cliffs that rise from the Sword Coast,
miles away and blissfully unaware that there's some nut throwing men off buildings out there, the player finds themselves in the tranquil grounds of Candlekeep, a fortified library of Alexandria, home to thousands of ancient texts and scholars who collect, study, and tend to them.
Greetings, young one.
You are the ward and foster son of the scholar, wizard, and former adventurer Gorion.
Oh, my child, I am glad I have found you.
Who has told you little of the mysterious circumstances of your adoption. You can rest assured that's not going to come up again. You've spent your years reading of the legendary adventures from the outside world, and getting up to mischief around the grounds with your childhood friend, Imoen.
Hey, it's me, Imoen.
Also an orphan and ward of Gorion. Yeah, that's definitely not going to come up again. But the tranquility here is unsettled when Gorion tells you to pack your things and prepare to embark on a journey with him, leaving Candlekeep for the first time in your life. He warns you.
Listen carefully. If we ever become separated, it is imperative that you make your way to the Friendly Arm Inn. There you will meet Khalid and Jahira. They have long been my friends, and you can trust them.
To everyone's surprise, this warning rings entirely true. In the woods east of Candlekeep, you and Gorion are ambushed by none other than the evil warrior from the intro, in an entourage of goons. Gorion tells you to flee and holds them off, only to fall to the warrior's blade. The next morning, Imoen,
Hey, it's me,
Imoen,
who had snuck from Candlekeep to shadow your journey with Gorion, meets up with you and commiserates in the loss of your foster father. Now the two of you are alone on this road through the wilderness, in a wondrous, dangerous, and vast land that you've only glimpsed in the books at Candlekeep. Do you follow up on Gorion's warning and seek out Khalid and Jahira at the Friendly Arm Inn? Do you strike out on your own and brave the perils of this world by the skin of your teeth? Do you take up with this helpful, if
Mantalan, you are so aggravating!
unusual
Stop touching me!
duo down the road, eager to investigate the strange goings-on at the mines of Nashkel, south on the border with Am? And what of the evil warrior who slew Gorion?
You know why I'm here. Hand over your ward and no one will be hurt.
Why has he sought you, an orphan of no repute, out from across the Sword Coast? That's really it when it comes to direction. The rest is up to you, your wits, and the helpful hands you meet along the way.
Oh, there, wanderer. Stay thy course a moment to indulge an old man.
There aren't any quest markers, nor is there any railing to compel you to follow the beats of the story necessarily. From this start, there's actually startlingly few places you can't travel to should you want to, and if you can survive or outrun the many dangers along the way. And even following the story, we'll see you traveling all over the Heartlands, chasing leads and exploring many areas, mostly on a small hook or a hunch. Even when you travel to the eponymous Baldur's Gate, one of those few areas which is not accessible until the game's final acts, you're regularly encouraged through quest lines to return to areas back in the Heartlands. Some companion quests aren't even completable until you get into the city.
Gentlemen, gentlewomen, may I introduce myself? I am Eldoth Krom.
Even the game's two expansion areas, introduced by Tales of the Sword Coast, Olgoth's Beard and Durlog's Tower, are both entirely accessible right from the gate. It's that kind of open-ended structure that really sets this game apart, not just from its modern successor, but also from its direct sequel. Baldur's Gate 1 is almost entirely open and contiguous, teeming with wilderness encounters.
Oh, Brother Therm.
Townships, multi-level dungeons, bandits,
I kicked him in the head till he was dead.
monsters of all shapes and sizes, and most tantalizing, rare magical items. It's an RPG written around an older school of world design, when the game and its designers were excited by the prospect of a dungeon master simulating a world for their players to freely explore and act in with agency. Many of the earliest and most well-known adventure modules, for instance, were designed around locations, with meticulously detailed inhabitants and building blocks for recurrent adventuring outside the scope of the page. They were called modules because it was meant to be, well, modular, something a dungeon master could plop down or retrofit into their milieu on a dime. It's a tradition that Baldur's Gate 1 seems to wear proudly and revel in, romping with a party of adventurers over the countryside and into the subterranean bowels of the earth, getting mixed up in isolated incidents and problems.
Ew, pal.
Driven entirely by your wanderlust and the promise of loot. And it's a world apart from the more guided, story-based experiences of latter-era modules that would serve as larger inspiration for not just Baldur's Gate 2, but for most subsequent RPG projects. Baldur's Gate 1 can be kind of intimidating to start with all that in mind, and doubly so when you realize that the lowliness of your station, a novice ward orphan, and the danger in adventuring isn't just a narrative device. Even in the opening area, there are creatures that can easily dispatch you and Imoen if you're not equipped or unprepared. And it's common to happen upon encounters in the wilderness or even civilized areas that are punching above your level. There are even some nasty surprises in places where you'd otherwise assume safety.
My friend.
But it's persevering and surmounting these obstacles that so defines the visceral satisfaction of playing and completing Baldur's Gate. In Baldur's Gate 1, you start about as competent as, well, yourself. You're a normal person in extraordinary circumstances. But through perseverance and mastery of the game's systems, and a healthy dose of magic items, you become heroic. There is a truly unique sense of growth in clawing your way from nobody to hero of the Heartlands that no game before or since has captured. That's where Baldur's Gate, in every step of its roughly 9 levels of play, leads you. And with the benefit of being a computer game, where one can undo a mistake and learn from it without sacrificing months and months of play, it's easily the smoothest and most accessible distillation of that experience ever made. Let's take a second to talk about the minutiae, though. Things that deserved mentioning, but didn't maybe tie into any larger theme or point, in no particular order. First off, the magic loot that we've been talking up this whole time. In traditional Dungeons & Dragons, bonuses are pretty hard to come by in stats and combat, which makes even something mundane in modern iterations like a +1 sword a huge boon with immediate results in improving combat effectiveness. Because of this, they're exceptionally rare, and finding even a +1 weapon is a fairly big event in low-level play. Baldur's Gate is no exception, with its more than 100 unique magic weapons, and more than 100 unique magic armors and equipment, many having unique names, bonuses, and shockingly elaborate backstories in their item descriptions. Finding one of these in the world is an event, and often a challenge as many of the enemies who carry them
None cross Grey Wolf and live.
will wield these against you. But once won, these items offer tremendous value, some of them so great that they'll stay with you through the end of the game. Second, the music is just stellar. Composer Michael Hennig's score makes wonderful use of leitmotif, getting a lot of mileage out of the game's central Basil Polidoris-esque melody. To sound anywhere from invigorating and adventurous to mysterious and haunting. It's a perfect accompaniment to thrilling, region-trotting adventures against an undercurrent of sinister mystery. Third, the voice acting, while sparse, is an all-star lineup of 90s and 2000s professional voice work. D. Bradley Baker, Michael Bell, Jeff Bennett, Greg Berger, Earl Bone, the legendary Jim Cummings, Jennifer Darling, Gray Delisle, Melissa Disney, Bill Farmer, Brian George, Michael Goh, Jennifer Hale, Jason Marsden, Rob Paulson, Diane Pershing, Kevin Michael Richardson, Neil Ross, Frank Welker, and those are just the ones whose work was personally recognizable.
Stand and deliver, that my hamster might have a better look at you.
It really lends an air of credibility.
You're perceptive for an old man. You know why I'm here.
You're a fool if you believe I would trust your benevolence.
in a pinch of delightful cartoonish camp
I'm always ready to entertain.
to the game's performances, and really elevates the game's limited story moments and NPC interactions.
How long must we wait here? Things stir to the south as we sit.
Fourth, the sheer number of possible companions in this game is kind of mind-boggling. These characters are found all over the Sword Coast, some requiring help in their own endeavors before staying with you permanently, some immediately up to join you in your goals, all but a few of them immediately accessible upon starting the game, resulting in an extremely varied possible party composition, a bounty that was sorely missing with the reality of Baldur's Gate 3's more gated act zones and smaller but much more highly produced companion roster. It all comes together to produce a game with laser-focused but drastically different design and tonal goals than the RPGs that have come since. It's not concerned with telling an incredibly deep or novel story.
Did you remember to wash your face?
Did now?
It's not worried about companions seeming like nuanced, fascinating character studies.
Better part of valor! Better part of valor!
And it's not afraid to let the player feel powerless, at least to start. Where it does put its time and energy is in providing a fantastic world to freely explore, with a cadre of eclectic characters, braving lethal danger in the painstaking pursuit of gold and glory. And it's all the unique execution of delivering that experience that Baldur's Gate 1 stands firmly beside and not behind the newest entry, kind of egging on softly.
Yeah, that one's great too. But have you tried doing battle with monsters?